Millionaire freezes when he sees a homeless woman with 2 babies. Would you adopt one? Before we begin, tell me in the comments, where are you watching this story from? I'd really love to know how far these stories of love are reaching. And if you enjoy emotional stories full of twists and heartfelt moments, make sure to subscribe to the channel. That helps me keep bringing you content that touches the heart and helps this project grow more and more. That night, Chicago felt frozen to the bone. It was early January, and winter showed no mercy on the city's streets. The wind howled between the tall buildings like an ancient lament. The sidewalks were covered in a thin layer of ice that reflected car headlights like shattered mirrors. The city, grand and fast-paced, carried on, blind to the invisible lives struggling to survive in its cracks. On the top floor of a mirrored building in the city's financial district, Graham Whitlow was shutting down his laptop after a video call. That had dragged on for more than 2 hours. He wore a perfectly pressed dress shirt, dark hair neatly combed, his gaze sharp yet vacant. The clock read 10:47 p.m. He stood up, loosened his tie with impatience, and walked to the massive glass window that dominated the penthouse wall. From up there, he saw the city like a chessboard, cold, orderly, predictable. But that night, something would break that predictability. He felt the need to leave, to breathe, to see the real world, or at least a version of it that didn't fit into a spreadsheet. He rode down in the steel and glass elevators to the ground floor. The lobby was lit with golden lights and decorated with winter arrangements. Everything about the place radiated control, order, distance. The security guard stood up as he approached. "Good evening, Mr. Whitlow. Should I call your car?" "No, I just need some air." Graham pushed the glass door open with moderate force and was instantly hit by a blast of cutting wind. And then his eyes froze. There, sitting on the ground near the building's wall, crouched over her knees, a young woman was shielding 2 babies wrapped in a thin blanket. Her very pale skin was marked by the cold, her light brown hair tied in a messy bun, loose strands clinging to her face in the wind. She wore a warm coat, her shoes were wet and untied. Despite her curled-up posture, there was tension in her body, like she was always ready to defend those 2 little ones with her life. Graham stopped. The world seemed to empty around him. The city noise faded. For a moment, there was only that image. She lifted her face with difficulty. Her grayish-green eyes gleamed under the faint entrance light. They didn't beg, but they said everything. Eyes that had seen more than they should have. "Sorry to bother you, sir," she said, her voice hoarse from cold and exhaustion. "I can clean the sidewalk. Wipe it down, clear the ice. I just need something to feed my kids." Graham didn't answer, not out of arrogance, but because his throat simply wouldn't cooperate. That request, so simple, so direct, without pity or misery, cut through his defenses like a silent blade. She wasn't begging. She was offering. "I'm not asking for charity," she continued, adjusting one of the babies stirring in her arms. "I'm a good worker. Fast. I've just been out here with them for days and ... double quotes." Her voice broke. He didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to go back inside, close the door, stay in his safe bubble. But another part, one he thought was dead, felt his heart pounding hard. Something in him recognized that woman, even without knowing who she was. Before he could move, the security guard appeared behind him, stiff, as if he knew exactly what needed to be done. "Mr. Whitlow, would you like me to remove this person from in front of the building?" Graham didn't answer right away. He stood still, staring at the woman and the babies. He felt the weight of the moment, like he'd gone back in time, as if her figure had emerged from a buried memory he tried hard to forget. "She's not doing anything wrong," he murmured. "I understand, sir, but the building policy is to keep the entrance clear of. I'm already leaving." But at that moment, the woman was already standing up, both babies clutched to her chest, wrapped in the thin blanket. Her face was the portrait of wounded dignity, no scene, no tears, just the silence of someone used to being pushed away. "Don't worry, I understand," she said, lowering her gaze. "Thank you for listening." She began to walk slowly, her feet sinking slightly into the thin snow. One of the babies coughed. She pulled him tighter into her coat. She walked with slow, proud steps, but her body was curved from the weight of motherhood and rejection. Graham watched her until she disappeared around the corner. He didn't call out. He didn't move. But his chest burned. There, amidst the luxury and steel, a crack had opened. And for the first time in years, he couldn't close it. The building door closed slowly behind Graham, muffling the last gust of icy wind. The sound of the glass sealing the space was like a stifled sigh of guilt, subtle but impossible to ignore. For a few seconds, he stood there, frozen in the golden lobby as if his feet were glued to the floor. The image of the woman disappearing down the sidewalk still burned inside him, like a wound that didn't bleed but seared. The security guard approached cautiously, watching Graham as if expecting some reprimand. "I was just following protocol, sir. She didn't have permission to remain in the common area." Graham didn't answer. His vacant gaze cut through the space as if searching for something beyond the marble-covered walls. He was there dressed in Italian wool, surrounded by artwork and automatic heaters, but his mind was walking with her. With that thin woman, holding two lives in her arms, asking for nothing but dignity. At last, he murmured, "She offered to work, not beg." The guard raised his eyebrows, uncomfortable, but Graham was already walking away, crossing the lobby toward the elevator. He entered alone. The doors closed, and as the lift ascended, his reflection in the steel mirror confronted him. Back in his apartment on the top floor, everything was silent. The soft lights turned on automatically as he entered. The light wood floor creaked faintly under his steps. The curtains were open, and outside, the city shimmered like a cold jewel. Down below, life continued, indifferent to what had just happened. But something inside him had changed. Graham set his phone on the counter and loosened his tie with an impatient gesture. He poured himself a glass of whiskey but didn't drink it. He walked to the main window and leaned his forehead against the glass, feeling the contrast between the warmth inside and the cold outside. The city felt both too far away and far too close. His mind kept replaying her voice on a loop. "I can clean the sidewalk. I just need to feed my children." There was no pleading, no manipulation, just a woman with two babies and a desperate kind of courage. Guilt began to take shape. At first, it was light, just a discomfort. But as the hours passed, it grew heavier. A silent burden. The images that once filled his mind graphs, contracts, meetings were gradually replaced by a single vision. Ivy, walking away down the sidewalk, arms clutching the children to her chest as if they were all she had in the world. Around midnight, he lit the automatic fireplace, but couldn't bring himself to sit. Every corner of the apartment now felt excessive, empty, irrelevant. The crystal, glasses, the leather couch, the art on the walls, everything stood in sharp contrast to the eyes of the woman he had let walk away. He went to the closet and grabbed a blanket. He didn't know why. He just did. Then, he opened the bottom drawer of his office, one he hadn't touched in years, and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside were childhood photos, letters from his sister, old clippings. He ran his fingers over her face, and one of the pictures, his sister smiling beside a Christmas tree in a year that felt like another lifetime. "If you had seen what I saw today, Rachel, what would you have done?" No answer came, but he felt it. He returned to the living room, grabbed his coat, and left. The wind was even sharper now. Even with his hands in his pockets and his collar turned up, Graham felt the cold like never before. It was as if the city itself was judging him. He walked the streets around the building, looking into alleys, stairwells, makeshift shelters. But she wasn't there. Back in the apartment, he stopped before the window again. And then he saw her. Down below, across the street, Ivy was sitting on the steps of a closed commercial building. She was awake, but still. The babies slept curled in her lap, wrapped in the same thin blanket. She stroked them with almost imperceptible movements. Her gaze was distant, but not defeated. Graham stood there, paralyzed. The image was so powerful it felt like something from a nightmare. But a WSN single quotes T. From the top of his glass world. He watched the woman who refused charity and offered work, trying to survive the coldest night of the year with 2 lives in her arms. He pressed his palm against the window pane, as if he could reach through it. But he didn't go. And in that moment, he realized it wasn't just the glass of the window that separated him from her. It was the glass of his own soul. The night remained freezing in Chicago. Outside, the wind slammed against the buildings, as if trying to tear down even the invisible walls around people's hearts. From his apartment high above the city, Graham stayed at the window, eyes locked on the unmoving figure across the street. Ivy sat on the steps of a closed commercial building, the 2 babies wrapped in a thin blanket that barely held up against the biting cold. Even from a distance, he could see she was trembling. But she didn't give in. That image tore something in him that no boardroom meeting, legal threat, or business scandal had ever touched. It was as if his world built on strategy and detachment had finally met its crack. Finally. Without thinking, Graham stepped away from the window, grabbed his overcoat, a wool beanie, and on impulse, the blanket he had set aside earlier. He took the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator. When he reached the street, the cold slapped him like a wake-up call. But he didn't stop. He crossed the empty avenue with quick, firm steps, eyes fixed on her. Ivy ... His voice cut through the silence of the night. She slowly lifted her head, her eyes foggy from exhaustion and wind. She was awake, but visibly worn out. Her face was pale, lips purplish. Even so, she looked at him with defiance. "You shouldn't be here," she muttered, struggling to shield her children. "And you shouldn't be on these steps." She tried to stand, but the movement was slow, hesitant. Graham stepped closer gently, not wanting to appear threatening. He knelt down beside her. "You need help. They need help. Don't argue with me right now." She squinted and shook her head. "Why did you come? Out of guilt? To patch up your conscience, millionaire trying to redeem himself? No ... It's not guilt." "Then what?" Graham looked at her, at the babies, at the cold around them. And after a long pause, he answered, "I don't have a name for it. I just know that if I leave you here one more night, I won't be able to look at myself in the mirror again." Ivy lowered her gaze. She was too tired to argue, but not weak enough to give in. Her pain was old, and it endured. "I don't want your pity," she said softly, almost a whisper. "If it's pity, I'd rather the cold." Graham's eyes tightened. That sentence hit deep. The raw honesty, unvarnished. No strategy. "It's not pity," he murmured, voice low and shaky. "It's something I haven't felt in a long time." For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. And something passed between them, a silent exchange of open wounds, unspoken exhaustion, of lives lost before they had a chance to truly begin. "I have a place, safe, clean with heat. It's not charity. It's the bare minimum." She hesitated for a moment, as if measuring all the times trust had meant getting hurt. But then she looked at her children, their feverish little faces, and sighed. "All right. But just for tonight, Graham nodded, not daring to smile. He reached his arms out slowly. Let me help carry one. Ivy, hesitantly, handed over Caleb, the sleepier of the two. Graham wrapped him in the blanket he had brought and held him. Carefully, as if carrying a fragile piece of hoped out, she stood slowly, knees weak, and together they crossed the street. The contrast was striking. She, in torn boots, a slipping backpack, her face worn. He, in a heavy wool coat, freshly shaven, sure-footed. And yet, for the first time in a long while, Graham felt small. Human. They climbed the stairs in silence, avoiding the elevator. When they reached the floor of the vacant apartment, Graham opened the door and turned on the lights. The space was simple, but warm. There was a sofa, a small open kitchen, and 2 bedrooms with clean mattresses. In the corner, an old dresser. Covered with a folded towel, Ivy entered with slow steps, eyes scanning the room like someone stepping into sacred ground. She sat on the sofa with Maisie still in her arms. The warmth began to return color to her face. Graham carefully placed Caleb next to his sister on an improvised blanket on the couch. She exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time. Thank you. Graham shook his head. No need to thank me. I should have done this earlier. She looked at him cautiously, as if still testing what was real, but said nothing. I'll get some things. Food, clothes, whatever you need. Ivy nodded, but before he walked out, she said, I'm not used to this. Someone ... staying. He looked at her, eyes filled with a feeling he couldn't yet name. Me neither. And then he left, leaving the door slightly ajar. As if saying, you can close it if you want, but you can also let me back in. The door to the small apartment closed slowly behind them. The silence inside was nearly as intense as it had been on the street, but now there was warmth, and that alone felt like a miracle. The place was modest but clean. One of the unoccupied units Graham kept in the same building, simply furnished. The lights were soft, the walls pale, and the faint smell of dry wood lingered in the air. Ivy stepped in with short, cautious steps, hair stuck to her face, arms wrapped around her children as if they might vanish at any moment. Asterisk. Graham turned on the portable heater and silently motioned to the couch. She sank into it, exhausted. The children fell asleep quickly, wrapped in clean blankets he had brought over from his own apartment. After an hour of quiet, he finally said, Let you rest. The back bedroom's clean if you need anything. I'll be close. Ivy didn't reply. She just nodded faintly, body still tense. That night, Graham didn't sleep. He stayed in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to the gentle sounds of life behind the door, the muffled cry of one of the babies, Ivy's soft barefoot steps, the creak of old mattress springs. Sounds he hadn't heard anywhere in his life for years. The next morning, something pulled him back early. He found the door slightly ajar. The weak sunlight spilled partway into the apartment, casting golden patches across the floor. Ivy was kneeling in front of the small stove, improvising what looked like a sort of porridge with powdered milk and flour she'd found in the cupboard. None of it smelled good, but she stirred it gently, as if preparing the most important meal in the world. Her light brown hair was tied up loosely, a few strands falling across her face. She wore an oversized sweatshirt, likely left behind by a previous tenant. And even in that humble scene, there was an almost sacred serenity in the way she rocked one child in her arms while feeding the other with a makeshift plastic spoon. Graham stood at the door, watching. She noticed him a few seconds later. Looked up slowly, not startled, just tired. I didn't find much, but they needed something to eat, she said quietly. It's okay. You did the right thing. She looked back at the baby, gently brushing his forehead. After a few moments of silence, she murmured without looking up, Do you think it's weird that I talk to them like they understand everything? No, Graham replied, stepping in closer. I think it's what's keeping them alive. There was a long pause. Ivy laid the child down to sleep and leaned against the wall, eyes half closed. The dark circles under her eyes told of too many sleepless nights. Have you always lived like this? In silence? She asked suddenly. Graham crossed his arms, leaning against the door frame. His expression hardened out of habit, but his voice came out soft. My younger sister. She trusted the wrong person. I warned her, tried to protect her, but she anyway. Ivy looked at him now, really looked. Her gaze wasn't invasive, it was understanding, as if she could see through layers no one else even noticed. Since then, he continued, his voice cracking for a moment, I shut everything out. Literally. People, emotions, all of it. It was easier. She looked away, pressing her lips together. I did the opposite, she said. I survived by never opening anything. They stood there, facing each other, two opposites who somehow recognized themselves in pain. He, a man surrounded by everything, yet emotionally locked behind invisible walls. She, a woman with nothing, but holding within her a fortress built out of wounds. For a moment, nothing else was said, but this silence, unlike the ones before, wasn't empty. It was a new kind of presence, one that said, I see you, and even if. Neither of them quite knew what was beginning to grow there, it was clear. Their worlds had collided. And after that moment, neither of them would ever be the same. The following days passed like a succession of silences filled with meaning. The apartment remained a temporary refuge, but little by little, the coldness of the space began giving way to an unfamiliar sense of comfort. Graham started showing up more often. Sometimes he brought fruit, other times boxes of diapers, blankets, even a small portable heater. He never asked Ivy if she needed anything. He just left things in the corner of the room, like someone afraid to intrude, but unable to stay away. She, in turn, thanked him with a nod or a soft, thank you. But she always kept the door slightly open, never fully. One afternoon, he came in with a book that had a colorful cover and placed it on the couch. It's about child development. Thought you might like it. Ivy held the book carefully, as if it were too rare to be hers. She looked at him for a few seconds, her eyes carrying a restrained tenderness. Thank you for thinking of them. Graham tried to smile, but said nothing. That kind of closeness still scared him, but something was growing between them. Invisible, yet unmistakable. Like electricity in the air before a storm. At night, when he returned to his own floor, he would sometimes stop in front of her door. He'd hear low voices, baby giggles, the sound of hurried little steps. A kind of life he hadn't known in years. Ivy felt it too. She noticed in the way his gaze lingered a second longer on her, in the quiet care with which he laid blankets beside the makeshift crib. She felt it in the way he spoke to the babies awkwardly, but genuinely, like someone learning everything from scratch. One evening, the city was especially quiet. Snow fell softly outside, and the streetlights tinted the room with an amber hue. Ivy thought the babies had finally fallen asleep. She was sitting on the floor, knees drawn up, hands clasped between her legs. Her face was turned toward the window, but her eyes were lost in memories no one could see. Graham entered quietly, holding a thermos of hot tea. You didn't eat dinner. I thought maybe you'd want this. She didn't respond, just looked at him for a few seconds and then lowered her head. That's when he noticed. She was crying. Not with sobs or desperation, but silently, proudly, like someone who had learned long ago never to make noise, even in pain. Graham approached carefully, knelt beside her, and extended a hand, hesitant. She tried to turn away, wiping her face with the back of her hand, as if simply being seen like that hurt more than the sadness itself. Sorry. I don't like being seen weak. He looked at her for a moment, then gently touched her face, wiping away a slow-falling tear. His hand trembled not from the cold, but from what that gesture meant. You don't have to be strong all the time. She closed her eyes, and in that moment, something inside her gave in. As if the last wall had finally collapsed. Without thinking, she fell into his arms. The embrace was tight, long, full of everything they'd never been able to say. For a moment, the world outside vanished. Their pain found an echo in each other, and the silence filled with meaning. Graham slowly pulled back, his hands still on either side of her face. His eyes searched hers, and she didn't look away. There was a magnetic pull between them, stronger than fear, stronger than reason. Their faces drew closer, slowly. And then Caleb cried. The baby's cry cut through the moment like an invisible blade. Ivy reacted first, pulling away, quickly wiping her face and scooping her son into her arms. He must be cold. She murmured, avoiding his gaze. Graham stood slowly, as if waking from a dream, his eyes still on her. Good night, Ivy. She didn't reply. He left, closing the door gently. Outside, he stood still for a moment, feeling the warmth of that moment still clinging to his skin and the cold of reality slowly returning to his chest. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was cement gray, and the city seemed to be holding its breath. Ivy had spent the night caring for Caleb, who was still restless. Maisie slept soundly beside her brother, and for a moment, the little apartment felt like a world apart from the pain surrounding them. But on the other side of the city, something was brewing like a storm about to burst. Celeste Hammond Graham's ex-girlfriend, a high society businesswoman and icon of perfect appearances, scrolled through her phone while her assistant showed her recent photos. One image, in particular, made her carefully polished smile tighten into a cold, thin line. There was Graham, her ex, the man she'd sworn to win back, entering a building at night with a thin woman in his arms, a sleeping child resting on his shoulder. Another photo showed Ivy at the apartment window, both children in her lap, bathed in warm, homely light. So that's why he pulled away. Celeste muttered bitterly. Without hesitation, she posted the images to a local gossip page with a venomous caption: Real estate millionaire hides mystery woman and 2 kids in private apartment. Philanthropy or seduction scheme. The story spread like wildfire. That same afternoon, Graham's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Investors, partners, journalists. Everyone wanted a statement. The headline was everywhere. His lawyers warned him. His reputation, built with discipline and distance, was now under attack by a story he had no idea how to explain. Confused and under pressure, Graham went up to the apartment where Ivy was. He opened the door with a heavy expression, his eyes colder than usual. Ivy felt the weight in the air before he even spoke. She was changing Caleb's clothes and turned slowly, her chest tightening. Did something happen? Graham walked to the center of the room, phone in hand. Did you see this? She took the phone and read in silence. The world spun beneath her feet. Who took these pictures? I don't know. Someone in the building. Maybe Celeste. It doesn't matter. She handed the phone back, trying to stay calm, but the shadow had already reached her eyes. So you came here to ask if it's true? If I've been playing you? It's not that, but you have to understand. The way this blew up, Ivy, I don't even know who you really are. The words fell like a stone in the center of the room. She stood still for a few seconds, breathing deeply, then laughed bitterly. So that's it? You pulled me off the street just to drag me through the mud in here, in front of the whole world? Ivy, please. No, I get it now. She stepped back twice. Her face was red, but her eyes were sharp like a blade. You could have asked with respect. You could have stood up for me, but you chose to doubt me, like everyone else. Ivy, it's not that simple. There's an image to maintain. I'm a mother. That's who I am. And I have dignity. Even when no one sees me. He went silent. For the first time, without arguments. That night, while the city slept under a blanket of silence, Ivy packed a small bag with diapers, 2 bottles, and the cleanest clothes she could find. She dressed the baby slowly, holding back tears the entire time. Before leaving, she looked one last time at the couch where they'd slept, at the blanket Graham had left. She touched it for a moment, then let it go. And then she walked out, Caleb and Maisie in her arms, descending the stairs without a sound, as if trying to disappear without a trace. The icy air greeted her outside, needles against her skin. But it didn't hurt as much as the disappointment she carried in her chest. From above, Graham saw her. Standing at the window, the streetlight casting her silhouette as she walked away down the sidewalk. For a moment, instinct screamed at him to run after her, but doubt still weighed more than regret, and when the building door closed behind her, something inside him closed too. The silence in Graham's apartment was suffocating. Ivy's presence had vanished as if it had never been there, but her absence echoed through every corner. The folded blanket on the couch, the faint scent of porridge still hanging in the air, a pacifier forgotten under the chair. Everything spoke of her, and of the children who were now out there again, exposed to the world. Graham sat on the living room floor, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. For the first time in a long while, there were no business deals to salvage, no reputation to protect, no meetings to pretend mattered. There was only the void she had left behind. Suddenly, he stood up as if something had awakened inside him. He walked to an old cabinet at the end of the hallway, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were Rachel's things, dusty boxes, papers, journals, memories he had chosen to bury instead of face. He sat on the floor and started going through them. Among envelopes and notebooks, he found a letter, folded with care. The envelope still bore his name, handwritten in small, steady letters. Graham hesitated before opening it. It was Rachel's handwriting, his younger sister. The only person who could make him laugh without trying. The one he had tried to protect from an abusive relationship and failed. The one he had buried at 24, swearing he'd never let anyone get close again. The letter seemed to have been written weeks before she died. His hands trembled as he read. Graham, I know you hate talking about feelings, but maybe someday this letter will make sense. I've always seen you as someone made of steel strong, calculated. But I also saw you hold my hand when my world was falling apart. That's why I need to ask you something. If one day you meet someone who needs more love than judgment, more shelter than control, don't push them away. Don't shut the door. Maybe she won't look like me. Maybe she'll have kids. Maybe she'll be carrying the weight of the world. But you'll recognize in her eyes the same emptiness you once saw in mine. And if that day comes, don't let her go. With love, Rachel. Graham finished reading and stayed frozen for several seconds. His chest ached as if something inside him had finally broken. The tears came without warning, hot, heavy, pushed out by years of denial. He tried to hold them back but couldn't. He cried right there, kneeling on the cold floor, clutching the letter like it was the last piece of someone he'd never been able to save. She knew, he whispered between sobs. Rachel knew. Before everything, before Ivy ever appeared in his life, his sister had already sensed he would one day be faced with a choice, and that no matter how far he tried to run, that choice would be the one to change everything. He stood with tear-filled eyes, but a resolute face. He threw on his coat, grabbed his car, keys, and left without thinking. It no longer mattered who was right or wrong. The only thing that mattered was that Ivy and the babies were out there, and maybe it still wasn't too late. You asked me not to let her go, Rachel, he said aloud, staring at his reflection in the elevator mirror. So now, I'm going after her. And he did. The snow had thickened, now covering the streets of Chicago in a dense white layer that seemed to erase footprints, stories, and unresolved choices. Graham drove without a destination, his heart racing like he was chasing a time that slipped through his fingers. Nearly 20 hours had passed since Ivy disappeared with the children, and no one had seen her since. He had stopped at 2 overcrowded shelters. Both gave the same answer. There were mothers with children, but none with 2 babies. He showed photos. Heard more no's. One guard, moved by his desperation, said, "Try the mission on 42nd Street, or the churches in the East Side. If she's trying to hide, she avoid anything official." So Graham went, one by one. Cold churches, EO waiting rooms, stairwells, community centers. He walked among invisible people, eyes wary, voices guarded. For the first time in years, he wasn't the man in the expensive suit. He was just a man looking for someone he lost. Because he didn't know how to protect her. By nightfall on the second day, the headlights of his car lit up the facade of an old warehouse, broken windows, boarded up doors. Forgotten, near the train tracks. He stopped. He didn't know why. But something pulled him in. He entered through the back, slow steps, eyes scanning, and then he saw a dot in the far corner of the warehouse. Wrapped in a thin blanket, Ivy lay curled on her side, the 2 babies in her arms, barely moving. Caleb coughed weakly. Maisie's little face was red and damp with fever sweat. "Ivy!" He shouted, running to her. She was conscious, but faint. Her eyes barely open, just enough to recognize him. She tried to sit up to shield the babies, but couldn't. You shouldn't be here. You need help. They do too. Please, don't fight me now." She didn't resist. She let him lift her. Graham carried all 3 in his arms like they were his own life and rushed to the car. He drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other gripping hers on the seat beside him. The drive to the hospital felt endless. When they arrived, he burst into the A, shouting for help, his eyes wild with panic. Nurses rushed in. Doctors assessed quickly. Ivy and the babies were taken into a heated room. High fevers, dehydration, exhaustion, but there was still time. For hours, Graham didn't leave the waiting room. He paced in circles, sat, stood again. A loop of guilt and helplessness. Each time a door opened, he stopped breathing. Finally, a nurse stepped out. She said Ivy and the babies were stable, that she was waking up, that he could see her. He entered quietly. The room was small, but warm. Ivy lay with N4 in her arm, cheeks pale, eyes tired but calm. The babies slept in separate cribs beside her, covered in hospital blankets. She turned her face toward him, saying nothing. Graham stepped closer, pulled up a chair, and sat at her side. He reached for her hand gently, as if asking for permission. "No, I was a coward," he said softly. "I let you doubt me when what you needed most was certainty, and then I lost you." She took a deep breath. There was no anger in her eyes, just exhaustion and a quiet sadness. "I tried to trust," she whispered, "but every time I trust, I break." Graham squeezed her hand, not hard, but with quiet resolve, as if to say, "I'm still here." Then, "Teach me how," he said. "If you can't trust me yet, teach me." She didn't answer with words. She simply closed her eyes and let him keep holding her hand. A little longer, and in that small room, among quiet breaths and blinking monitors, the silence finally stopped hurting. The days at the hospital passed in a silence that healed. It was no longer the silence of coldness or indifference. It was the kind that soothes, the kind that gives space for what needs to be reborn. Ivy, resting in her hospital bed, watched her children sleep in the cribs beside her. Their cheeks, Now Rosie carried back the warmth she thought she had lost. Graham hadn't left her side for a single day. He slept in a stiff armchair, head resting on the edge of her bed, or spent hours reading softly to Maisie while Ivy rested. There were no promises, no grand declarations, just presence. And for her, that was more than any speech. On the third day, when Ivy was already up, walking down the hall with the babies in her arms, Graham appeared at the end of the corridor with a bag. Inside, a soft fabric dress, 2 baby onesies, and a white teddy bear with a blue ribbon around its neck. She looked at him with a faint smile. "Are you trying to buy me?" He smiled back, a little embarrassed. "No, I'm trying to start right, even after doing everything wrong." When she was discharged, Graham's car was already waiting. But this time, Ivy didn't ask where they were going. She simply got in the back seat with Caleb and Maisie in her arms. And when the car stopped in front of the small building where everything had begun, she bit her lower lip and whispered, "Is it the same apartment?" "It is," he answered. "But now it's not just a shelter, it's a home. If you want it to be." When she opened the door, Ivy was momentarily breathless. The same apartment that once felt cold and improvised was now transformed. There was a soft rug on the floor, toys gently arranged in the corner of the room, light curtains on the windows and on the wall, a single empty frame hanging above the couch. She looked around in silence, heart pounding faster with every step. On the table sat a small, simple cake, topped with 3 hand-cut paper figures, a man, a woman, and 2 babies. Ivy raised a hand to her mouth, surprised, then turned to Graham, who stood by the door, nervous like someone on the edge of doing something foolish. "You did all this for us?" "Not out of pity," he said. "Not out of guilt, but because ... For the first time, I want someone to stay, not just pass through." She held Caleb closer, her eyes misty. "Graham, I'm not perfect. I have flaws, scars, fears. And my children ... they need stability, not empty promises." "I know," he said, stepping closer. "That's why I don't want to save you. I want to build with you, one day at a time." Ivy looked at him for a few seconds, as if searching for traps in his words. But she found nothing but truth. Raw, human, imperfect. Like her own. "You do know that if you choose this, it's forever, right?" "I want forever, with every stumble it brings," she nodded. For the first time, without fear. In the weeks that followed, Graham filed the paperwork for adoption. With Ivy's consent, he legally became the father of Caleb and Maisie. During the interview with the social worker, he said something Ivy would never forget. "They don't need my last name to be mine, but I want them to grow up knowing someone chose to stay, that someone saw them on their worst day and still saw love." The paperwork was signed on a Friday morning. Ivy held the babies in her arms as Graham signed the final document. The judge watched them with a quiet smile and said, "We don't see stories like this every day, but when we do, we remember why it's still worth believing." That same day, back at the apartment, Graham set his phone on a shelf to take a photo. Ivy fixed her hair, sat on the couch with the kids, and he slid in beside her, gently pulling her closer. It wasn't a staged pose. It was a real moment. The first photo of their new family was taken just like that. No filters, no makeup. Just soft smiles, emotional eyes, toys scattered on the floor, and a teddy bear tipped over on the rug. And in the background, hanging on the wall, now filled, was the frame containing an old photo of Graham's sister Rachel, smiling gently. A silent blessing. Months had passed since the day Ivy returned to that small apartment, the same one where she had nearly frozen with her children in her arms. Now transformed into a home filled with color, voices, and the smell of fresh bread in the oven. The city, though still cold in some corners, no longer felt so unforgiving, and her heart, once calloused by distrust, now beat to a new rhythm. The steady pulse of real hope. Ivy's transformation didn't happen overnight. There were nights of uncertainty, relapses into fear, hushed conversations with Graham about wounds that still ached. But she never again went to sleep feeling invisible. By Graham's side, she discovered that true love isn't rushed. It simply stays. It was his idea to renovate the old abandoned house on Maple Street, one he had bought years ago as an investment but never used. When Ivy mentioned that she wanted to give back what she received, he answered without hesitation, "Then let's build it together." And they did. For weeks, they worked side by side with architects, volunteers, and donors. Ivy led with a gentle firmness. Every corner of the house had to be the opposite of what she had known in cold. Impersonal shelters, colorful bedspreads, diapers in plain sight, a large kitchen where mothers could cook together. One wall bore a mural of flowers with the words, "You are not alone." That's how Rises de Esperanza, Roots of Hope, was born, a haven for single mothers who, like Ivy, carried more than children in their arms. They carried hard stories, open wounds, and a powerful will to keep going, even when everything told them not to. Graham, once known as a cold businessman, allergic to emotion, was now the main investor in the project. But more than that, he was seen there as a father, a partner, a man who chose to trade glass towers for open windows to the real world. At the official launch, the community center auditorium was filled with a diverse crowd. There were students, journalists, stay-at-home moms, mothers with babies in their laps, and men with misty eyes. On stage, Ivy adjusted the microphone with trembling hands. She wore a simple dress, flat shoes, and a bracelet engraved with the names Caleb and Maisie. In the audience, Graham held both children in his lap, all three listening as if to a bedtime story. The lights dimmed. A short video played, showing scenes of the renovation. The first families welcomed, mothers smiling with donated baskets and new clothes. Then, silence. Ivy took a deep breath. For a second, she thought of the 19-year-old girl leaving, a shelter with donated clothes and no certainty in her heart. She thought of the 27-year-old woman freezing in front of a closed door. And she thought of the mother she was now, lifted by love, but standing on her own strength. "When people ask what brought me here," she began, her voice unsteady, "I always say the cold. It was the cold that made me knock on doors. It was fear that made me offer cleaning in exchange for food. But what kept me going was someone's choice to see me not as a mistake, but as a beginning." She looked at Graham for a moment. His eyes were locked on her with the same expression. From the night she walked away with the babies and he couldn't move. But now he was smiling, not with pride, but with gratitude. "I'm not a rescue story. I'm a journey." Because true love doesn't pull us out of the hole, it sits beside us until we have the strength to stand. It doesn't save us. It walks with us, and sometimes it starts with the door opening in the middle of winter. The applause came in waves, accompanied by quiet tears. Some mothers cried openly, hugging their children. A woman walked to the stage and handed Ivy a note. "You said what I never had the courage to. Thank you for existing." After the ceremony, outside, Graham walked beside her with Maisie in his arms. Ivy carried Caleb. The setting sun bathed the sky in orange, and its reflection in the windows made the world look a little less harsh. "You did it, Ivy. You're changing lives." She looked at him with tenderness. "You changed one too, mine." Graham gently pulled her closer and whispered, "You never needed me to save you, but I needed to find you." She smiled, pressing her forehead against his, and closed her eyes, a wordless thank you. That night, the NGO added one more name to the list of women waiting for support. But for Ivy, the greatest name it gained was Faith Restored. Not in perfect endings, but in real new beginnings. So, what did you think of this story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments. I'd love to know how deeply this story touched you. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next emotional stories I'm preparing. Oh, and before you go, I've picked another moving story that will touch your heart even more. Just click and keep this journey going with us.